Hello, everyone. So today we are going back to Animal Farm. Uh, we have chapter 2 uh, to cover today. But before we do that, I'd like uh, to take a look at the notes that I have on the left. So apparently yesterday I was so amused and fascinated by the book that I forgot to make even a single note there. So I covered it a little bit. uh, I got discovered, and now I have something that I uh, thought of during the reading of the first chapter. And I'd like, before we go to the chapter 2, to briefly cover what we have here at the notes right now, right? So the first thing that I would like to mention, and it would also might be useful as some sort of recap of what happened in previous parts, right, in previous series. So that fable tale as a format is a great mean to encourage critical thinking. It was an ancient, more or less, ancient way to produce critical satire, political satire sometimes. And the main benefit of having a fable tale instead of direct political critique is that it's detaching thoughts from authors. And this helps to look at ideas clearly, more clear, with less either prejudice or upfront admiration. So if you, for example, knew that you are on the side, on the same side as authors, you might take their ideas less critically unless something really preposterous is written there. But if those ideas are detached, in some sense, you are more prone to face them critically. Yes, so that's a very interesting way, and I'd like to say that it's a good thing to my idea. Then I'd like to cover some of major ideas again. Major is the old boar who actually come up with most of the ideological stuff that is going to happen in Animal Farm here. And uh, ideas of Major are very uh, loosely based on the Communist Manifesto, as I can recall. And some of the ideas, I really was enjoying those ideas because they captured some interesting issues with this ideology, right? So, uh, three ideas that captured my attention were that he didn't compare the life in a farm with the life in the nature. So he claims that life on a farm is miserable, and sure, he is absolutely right because the animals there are obviously going to be slaughtered at some point, and they have to work, and all they have in return is just some food, not the abundance of food, some shelter for them to sleep at night, and some company that, well, for some social animals is a good thing, right? But and he claims that this is not good because they work so hard, and obviously the man keeps all the profits to himself. But the idea is that in the nature the misery is even more plentiful, and I don't want to go into that in the details of that right now. I talked about that previously in the first stream, but yeah, this is the idea. So the worldview is not full without taking into consideration of what happened before animals were, let's call it, organized in farms. Uh, then he was mistaken when he claimed that the farmer did nothing and only claimed the profits for himself. because we actually do know that working as a farmer is like it's very hard job. You have to work very hard, and just dismiss the work of the farmer, it would be not wise. And why they do that, I actually also understand that, and I will talk about that a bit later. But for now, let's leave it at that, right? And the last point is that he calls for animals not to have anything in common with the man, with their enemy, alleged. He lists some things that should be prohibited, but among those things, there are some obvious evils. For example, that farmers harm their animals, and so the thing is that above all, you should not harm other animals, right? Uh, and there are some more or less arbitrary things. For example, drinking alcohol, smoking tobacco. Well, obviously, you have to decide for yourself about such things. But also, some of good things also got into that list. Do not own any house, do not live in a house, do not sleep in the bed, do not wear any clothes. And those are there on the list, just it looks like just in spite, just to uh, really distinguish yourself from the enemy in every way possible. And this is not actually very wise as well. And I see that this has an analogy with some of the claims of Communist Manifesto, which particularly I'm looking at the dissolvement of a family, uh, which I do not agree with. So that's that, right? The last point that I concluded after reading the chapter 1 was that we should consider the fact that animals and people really do exist on different planes. Their existence is well, radically different. They are of different species. Their thinking capacities are extremely different. And I know that this is kind of weird to say that, uh, knowing that in that tale we have to suspend some disbelief that animals are communicating with each other in the same way as people do. They talk in perfect English, even better than I do. And yes, but the analogy actually here is in the air, as if uh, there is a comparison between animals and proletarians and men and bourgeoisie, right? And this would be a wrong thing to do, because obviously animals cannot comprehend the probably cannot comprehend the idea of a farm, but proletarians do. And the actually what I should have put on the first place here is that proletarians and bourgeoisie, being that all of them are people, they have the same rights and same uh, aspirations for good life and bright future. And there should be no discussion about that. So no matter how opposed you might be to the Communist Manifesto, you just cannot make claims that proletarians are like animals or whatever, or children or dumbasses. It's off the table. It's this critique is unacceptable. So right now we got that covered, and we can go to reading chapter 2, which I'm kind of excited. So chapter 2. 3 nights later, old Major died peacefully in his sleep, so he did avoid his fate of being slaughtered, uh, as opposite to what he predicted himself. His body was buried at the foot of the orchard. This was early in March. During the next 3 months, there was much secret activity. Major's speech had given the more intelligent animals on the farm a completely new outlook on life. They did not know when the rebellion predicted by Major would take place. They had no reason for thinking that it would be within their own lifetime, but they saw clearly that it was their duty to prepare for it. The work of teaching and organizing the others fell naturally upon the pigs, who were generally recognized as being the cleverest of the animals. Preeminent among the pigs were two young boars named Snowball and Napoleon, whom Mr. Jones was breeding up for sale. Napoleon was a large, further fierce-looking Berkshire boar, the only Berkshire on the farm, not much of a talker, but with a reputation for getting his own way. Snowball was a mere vivacious pig than Napoleon, quicker in speech and more inventive, but was not considered to have the same depth of character. All the other male pigs on the farm were porkers. The best known among them was a small fat pig named Squealer, with very round cheeks, twinkling eyes, nimble movements, and a shrill voice. He was a brilliant talker, and when he was arguing some difficult points, he had a way of skipping from side to side and whisking his tail, which was somehow very persuasive. The other said of Squealer that he could turn black into white. These three had elaborated old Major's teachings into a complete system of thought, to which they gave the name of animalism. Several nights a week after Mr. Jones was asleep, they held secret meetings in the barn and expounded the principles of animalism to the others. At the beginning, they met with much stupidity and apathy. Some of the animals talked of the duty of loyalty to Mr. Jones, whom they referred to as master, or made elementary remarks such as Mr. Jones feeds us. If he were gone, we should starve to death. Others asked such questions as, why should we care what happens after we are dead? Or, if this rebellion is to happen anyway, what difference does it make whether we work for it or not? And the pigs had great difficulty in making them see that this was contrary to the spirit of animalism. The stupidest question of all were asked by Molly, the white mare. The first question she asked Snowball was, will there still be sugar after the rebellion? No, said Snowball firmly. We have no means of making sugar on this farm. Besides, you do not need sugar. You will have all the oats and hay you want. And shall I still be allowed to wear ribbons in my mane? Asked Molly. Comrade, said Snowball. Those ribbons that you are so devoted to are the badge of slavery. Can you not understand that liberty is worth more than ribbons? Molly agreed, but she did not sound very convinced. The pigs had an even harder struggle to counteract the lies put about by Moses, the tame raven. Moses, who was Mr. Jones' especial pet, was a spy and a tale-bearer, but he was also a clever talker. He claimed to know of the existence of a mysterious country called Sugar Candy Mountain, to which all animals went when they died. It was situated somewhere up in the sky, a little distance beyond the clouds, Moses said. In Sugar Candy Mountain, it was Sunday 7 days a week. Clover was in season all the years round, and lump sugar and linseed cake grew on the hedges. The animals hated Moses because he told tales and did no work. But some of them believed in Sugar Candy Mountain, and the pigs had to argue very hard to persuade them there was no such place. Their most faithful disciples. Okay, I stopped here just to understand if this was the end of the discussion about Sugar Candy Mountain. Because there are a lot of things that I would like to add some thoughts about, right? So obviously, the first things that came to the question is the questions of exactly practical approach, right? So the most practically oriented animals here were asking about how would they live. Should they really abandon their current master, because there is only one for now, uh, knowing that, well, the master feeds them, right, and he takes care of them, even if it's not very well. And those are just valid questions, right? And of course, I absolutely love the question that the Molly asked is, will there still be sugar after the rebellion? So the the, the question is that she kind of used to this life, and even though it's not a very vacacious life, it still has some treats in it, and well, she cares about that treat, and she would like to keep it even after all other parts of her life might get better. uh, some of the old treats, she expected them to stay, right? So yeah, these practical questions, they draw an allegory to some of the practical questions, probably to Communist Manifesto. Uh, and of course, the things that I think about when I think about Communist Manifesto is how to organize life without private property at all, right? And of a bit different practical approach is what we have to do with well, it's not extremely different, but it has something to do with the abolishment of inheritance, rights to inherit something. So yes, this is the first type of question. The second one is obviously an analogy to the religion, and the name Moses obviously is not here just occasionally, right? They have uh, the authors obviously had an idea, right? So now I get it. And the Sugar Candy Mountain is obviously something akin to paradise, and the whole idea of the life on the Sugar Candy Mountain is something about the more maybe naive way of thinking about religion, when people think that religion is only about devoting their life to something in hopes to get a never-ending vacation somewhere where the pleasures is everything that you might get, right? So uh, this is a really not very comprehensive way of thinking about religion, but of course it it has its place in our lives, right? This type of thinking about such matters, uh, and I absolutely love that the animals did not really like Moses because he didn't work, but some of them really loved his stories, right? So yeah, this is obviously an attempt to make this raven into somewhat a caricature, obviously, of a priest, right? uh, Maybe. Yeah, okay, I cannot think of the right word to say for it. So yeah, this already looks very great. Moving on. Their most faithful disciples were the two cart horses, Boxer and Clover. Those two had great difficulty in thinking anything out for themselves, but having once accepted the pigs as their teachers, they absorbed everything that they were told and passed it on to the other animals by simple arguments. They were unfailing in their attendance at the secret meetings in the barn, and led the singing of Beasts of England, with which the meetings always ended. Now, as it turned out, the rebellion was achieved much earlier and more easily than anything had expected. In past years, Mr. Jones, although a hard master, had been a capable farmer, but of late he had fallen on evil days. He had become much disheartened after losing money in a lawsuit and had taken to drinking more than was good for him. For whole days at a time, he would lounge in his Windsor chair in the kitchen, reading the newspapers, drinking, and occasionally feeding Moses on crusts of bread soaked in beer. His men were idle and dishonest. The fields were full of weeds, the buildings wanted roofings, the hedges were neglected, and the animals were underfed. June came, and the hay was almost ready for cutting. On Midsummer's Eve, which was a Saturday, Mr. Jones went into Wellington and got so drunk at the Red Lion that he did not come back till Monday on Sunday. Sorry, till midday on Sunday. The man had milked the cows in the early morning and then had gone out rabbiting without bothering to feed the animals. When Mr. Jones got back, he immediately went to sleep on the drawing room sofa with the news of the world over his face, so that when evening came, the animals were still unfed. At last, they could stand it no longer. One of the cows broke in the door of the store shed with her horn, and all the animals began to help themselves from the beans. It was just then that Mr. Jones woke up. The next moment, he and his 4 men were in the store shed with whips in their hands, lashing out in all directions. This was more than the hungry animals could bear. With one accord, though nothing of the kind had been planned beforehand, they flung themselves upon their tormentors. Jones and his men suddenly found themselves being butted and kicked from all sides. The situation was quite out of their control. They had never seen animals behave like this before, and this sudden uprising of creatures whom they were used to thrashing and maltreating just as they choose frightened them almost out of their wits. After only a moment or two, they gave up trying to defend themselves and took to their heels. A minute later, all 5 of them were in full flight down the cart track that led to the main road, with the animals pursuing them in triumph. Mrs. Jones looked out of the bedroom window, saw what was happening, hurriedly flung a few possessions into a carpet bag, and leaped out of the farm by another way. Moses sprang off his perch and flapped after her, croaking loudly. Meanwhile, the animals had chased Jones and his men out on the road and slammed the 5-barred gate behind them. And so, almost before they knew what was happening, the rebellion had been successfully carried through. Jones was expelled, and the manor farm was theirs. So it was rather a peaceful rebellion. I actually expected some bloodshed, and I'm glad that it didn't come to that. For the first few minutes, the animals could hardly believe in their good fortune. Their first act was to gallop in a body right round the boundaries of the farm, as though to make quite sure that no human being was hiding anywhere upon it. Then they raced back to the farm buildings to wipe out the last traces of John's hated reign. The harness room at the end of the stables was broken open. The bits, the nose rings, the dog chain, the cruel knives with which Mr. Jones had been used to castrate the pigs and lambs were all flung down the well. The reins, the halters, the blinkers, the degrading nosebags were thrown onto the rubbish fire which was burning in the yard. So were the whips. All the animals capered with joy when they saw the whips going up in flames. Snowball also threw onto the fire ribbons with which the horses' manes and tails had usually been decorated on market days. Ribbons, he said, should be considered as clothes, which are the mark of human being. All animals should go naked. When Boxer heard that, he fetched the small straw hat which he wore in summer to keep the flies out of his ears, and flung it to the fire with the rest. In a very little while, the animals had destroyed everything that reminded them of Mr. Jones. Napoleon then led them back to the store shed and served out a double ration of corn to everybody, with 2 biscuits for each dog. Then they sent beasts of England from end to end 7 times running, and uh, after that they settled down for the night and slept as they had never slept before. But they woke at dawn as usual, and suddenly remembering the glorious scene that had happened, they all raced out into the pasture together. A little way down the pasture there was a knoll that commanded a view of most of the farm. The animals rushed to the top of it and gazed round them in the clear morning light. Yes, it was theirs. Everything that they could see was theirs. In the ecstasy of that thought, they gamboled round and round. They hurled themselves into the air in great leaps of excitement. They rolled in the dew. They cropped mouthfuls of the sweet summer grass. They kicked up clods of the back earth and snuffed its rich scent. Then they made a tour of inspection of the whole farm and surveyed with speechless admiration the plough land, the hay field, the orchard, the pool, the spinney. It was as though they had never seen these things before, and even now they could hardly believe that it was all their own. Then they filed back to the farm buildings and halted in silence outside the door of the farmhouse. That was theirs too, but they were frightened to go inside. After a moment, however, Snowball and Napoleon battered the door open with their shoulders, and the animals entered in a single file, walking with the utmost care for fear of disturbing anything. They tiptoed from room to room, afraid to speak above a whisper, and gazing with a kind of awe at the unbelievable luxury, at the beds with their feather mattresses, the looking glasses, the horsehair sofa, the Brussels carpet, the lithographs of Queen Victoria over the drawing room mantelpiece. They were last coming down the stairs when Molly was discovered to be missing. Going back, the others found that she had remained behind in the best bedroom. She had taken a piece of blue ribbon from Mrs. Jones's dressing table and was holding it against her shoulder and admiring herself in a glass in a very foolish manner. The others reproached her sharply, and they went outside. Some hams hanging in the kitchen were taken out for burial, and the barrel of beer in the scullery was stove in with a kick from Boxer's hoof. Otherwise, nothing in the house was touched. An unanimous resolution was passed on the spot that the farmhouse should be preserved as a museum. All were agreed that no animal must ever live there. Mhm. The animals had their breakfast, and then Snowball and Napoleon called them together again. So, I never. This exciting is very cheerful, and animals really kind of deserve a break. So, I kind of want to be joyful with them, but there is a feeling that they don't really have the grasps on what they got themselves into, and this kind of little saddens this celebration. The animals had their breakfast, and then Snowball and Napoleon called them together again. Comrades, said Snowball, it is 6:30, and we have a long day before us. Today we begin the hay harvest, but there is another matter that must be attended to first. The pigs now revealed that during the past 3 months they had taught themselves to read and write down from an old spelling book which had belonged to Mr. Jones's children and which had been thrown on the rubbish heap. Napoleon sent for pots of black and white paint and led the way down to the 5-barred gate that gave on to the main road. Then Snowball, for it was Snowball who was best at writing, took a brush between the two knuckles of his trotter, painted out Manor Farm from the top bar of the gate, and in its place painted Animal Farm. This was the name of the farm from now onwards. After this, they went back to the farm buildings, where Snowball and Napoleon sent for a ladder, which they caused to be set against the end wall of the big barn. They explained that by their studies of the past 3 months, the pigs had succeeded in reducing the principles of animalism to 7 commandments. These 7 commandments would now be inscribed on the wall. They would form an unalterable law by which all the animals on an animal farm must live forever after. With some difficulty, for it was not easy for a pig to balance himself on a ladder, Snowball climbed up and set to work, with Squealer a few rungs below him holding the paint pot. The commandments were written on the turret wall in great white letters that could be read 30 yards away. They ran thus: the 7 commandments. Whatever goes upon 2 legs is an enemy. Whatever goes upon 4 legs or has wings is a friend. No animal shall wear clothes, no animal shall sleep in a bed, no animal shall drink alcohol, no animal shall kill any other animals. All animals are equal. That's interesting because the order of the commandments does matter. And I kind of surprised that they put all animals are equal to be the last one. I would assume that it should be all animals are equal. No animal shall kill any other animal. Whatever goes up upon 4 legs or has wings is a friend. Whatever goes upon 2 legs is an enemy, and then all the rest. But rather, they did with firstly defining who is an enemy, secondly, defining who is allegedly a friend. Then they list some prohibitions which are quite arbitrary for the most part, and the one that actually does make sense is the last one in this list. And they close with the Declaration of Rights. Apparently, rights. They got their priorities wrong, it seems to me, and that is not a good start. But okay, at least they did formulated their ideology rather shortly, so they could educate their people with on that case, right? And let's see how that goes. It was very neatly written, and except that friend was written friend, and one of the s's was the wrong way around, the spelling was correct all the way through. Snowball read it aloud for the benefit of the others. All the animals nodded in complete agreement, and the cleverer ones at once began to learn the commandments by heart. Now, comrades, cried Snowball, throwing down the paintbrush, to the hayfield. Let us make a point of honor to get in the harvest more quickly than Jones and his men could do. But at this moment, the 3 cows, who had seemed uneasy for some time past, set up a loud lowing. They had not been milked for 24 hours, and their udders were almost bursting. After a little thought, the pigs sent for buckets and milked the cows fairly successfully, their trotters being well adapted to this task. Soon there were 5 buckets of frozen creamy milk, at which many of animals looked with considerable interest. What is going to happen to all that milk? Said someone. Jones used sometimes to mix some of it in our mash, said one of the hens. "Never mind the milk, comrades," cried Napoleon, placing himself in the front of the buckets. "That will be attended to. The harvest is more important. Comrade Snowball will lead the way. I shall follow in a few minutes. Forward, comrades, the hay is waiting." So the animals trooped down to the hayfield to begin the harvest, and when they came back in the evening, it was noticed that the milk had disappeared. Okay, so this is the end of the second chapter. It ended on a cliffhanger of some sorts. Obviously, we can kind of guess what's going on here. And probably Napoleon drank that milk for himself. I like that they included that some of the things that were done by people were actually necessary to do. For example, milking the cows. They also got back to harvesting, which is actually very hard labor. And one could think that since they do not actually forced to do so, they would not do that. But maybe it's more than just a force of habit. Maybe later down the track, it will be explained that animals actually figured out the way to trade with people, so the results of the harvest would be useful to them, right? But I actually also remember that the major in the first chapter proclaimed that no animal should ever do trading, right? And so this is a conundrum that just begs for some resolvement, right? And I guess we will see it in the next chapter or so. Now, I did read that with quite an enjoyment, and again, I did not make any notes about this chapter, and I guess I'm gonna continue with that approach. I do reading on the stream. I share with my thoughts. Then later off the screen, I'm going to fill my notes here. And before we go to the next chapter, we will briefly discuss what had been going on in previous chapters, not the chronological order of some events, but rather general idea. What those animals had gone through, what ideas, what ideologies they experienced in the previous chapter, and what analogies came to mind when you read the previous chapter, right? So at this point, I'm going to end the stream, and I wish you all the happy night or wherever you are, day, evening. So, and we'll see you sometime next time. Bye bye.